Hello everybody, and thank you all for joining us on this webinar focusing on the updates to NHBC standards for 2022. My name is Ryan Forshaw and I'll be hosting the event for you today, and I'll be ably supported by Stephen Oddenbaku, Alex Taylor, John Patton and Daniel Hicks from our Standards Innovation and Research team, who will be answering and collating any questions that you raise throughout the broadcast. The session will last approximately 45 minutes, with the first part providing an update on the key changes within NHBC standards for this year. The digital release for this update has already happened, and some of you may already be familiar with the headlines. The latter part of the presentation will take a look at some of the considerations around the future home standard and the impact that this will have on future updates to NHBC standards. At the end of the presentation, we'll be sticking around for approximately 20 minutes for the Q&A session. So if you have any questions during the session, you can write them into the Q&A box that you'll find either on the bottom or the top of your screen, and we will either answer them there and then, or we'll come back to you at the end of the webinar. Please note that if we have a large volume of questions, we may have to come back to you at a later date. Okay, so let's get things started. During 2021, our standards team worked with various stakeholders across the industry to review technical content within NHBC standards to ensure it remained accurate and relevant. Following this review, key revisions were made to a number of chapters and clauses as seen on screen here. Over the next slides, we will provide some further information around each of these updates. Please note that NHBC Standards 2022 apply to all homes where the foundations were started on or after January the 1st this year. The first update we will look at is for Chapter 2.1, which includes details of each of the technical requirements. The key change here is that technical requirement R3 for materials now mentions NHBC accepts. NHBC accepts is our comprehensive review service for innovative products and systems. This provides an alternative route of compliance for products or systems, such as MMC systems, outside of third-party certification process undertaken by technical approval bodies. Further information about NHBC accepts can be found in the NHBC Tech Zone on our website. Chapter 3.1 on concrete and its reinforcement has been updated to coincide with BS 8500. BS 8500 complements BS EN 206 and describes ways of specifying concrete. Tables 3, 4, 6 and 7 from Chapter 3.1, as shown on screen here, have now been updated to reflect the value changes to minimum specification for concrete mixes that are included in BS 8500. To offer additional guidance with the use of Chapter 3.3 on timber preservation, a new table of definitions has been provided prior to the introduction. These definitions have been introduced to give clarity on some of the common terms used within this chapter. Staying with Chapter 3.3, there is also additional guidance on durability. A new paragraph has been added to the guidance which references both BS EN 350 and the Wood Preservative Association's Wood Selection Guide. This is to provide additional advice on whether natural durability alone is appropriate for a specific use class. Within Chapter 4.4, new guidance has been included relating to Raft foundations. The new bullet point is highlighted on screen and states that raft and semi-raft foundations should be designed to support the building envelope without the risk of differential movement between leaves of cavity walls. This additional bullet point was added to clarify a well-known and respected position, but one not actually stated. It became necessary after receiving a number of insulated raft foundations, which showed the outer leaf of masonry to the external wall being supported on concrete curbs or similar, and in effect the outer leaf of the cavity wall having a different support system to the inner leaf. This approach is unacceptable as it is likely to lead to differential movement between inner and outer leaves. The image on screen here shows an example of this unacceptable practice. To clarify from the previous slides, both leaves of cavity wall should be built on the same foundation as illustrated in Chapter 4.4, Clause 13. Reference to cold bridging at door thresholds has now been included in Clause 5.121. This refers to thermal insulation in walls and floors below DPC. Cold bridging through research with the wider industry has been identified as a high-risk area. From June this year, approved document L1 will require photographic evidence in order to sign off a dwelling. Of relevance here is the requirement to have a photo for each plot which shows the continuity and quality of insulation at an external door threshold. Let's take a look at changes to Chapter 6.1 for external masonry walls. Clause 6.117 has been updated to add two more elements. Firstly, the use of low-density polyethylene was excluded in accordance with the requirements of BS 6515. Also, reference is made to using products in accordance with manufacturers' recommendations. This is to remain consistent throughout the guidance and to emphasise that we are not recommending going against the manufacturer's recommendations. There are also two amendments to Clause 6.118. The subheading has now been renamed to Wall Ties and Bed Joint Reinforcement. Additionally, a note has been added regarding vertical spacing of wall ties. These notes were added to clarify how wall ties were adjusted to deal with rigid insulation boards and studded panel construction, where normal distribution of wall ties cannot be achieved. And within the cold weather working clause, there have been some corrections made. We should note that the correction relates to the range of air temperatures quoted within the clause. It was meant to read 1 degrees and 3 degrees respectively. It is also worth noting that some have contrasted this guidance with that in Chapter 3.2, where a single figure of 2 degrees was given. The new guidance here is far better as it gives a range, and more importantly, it gives a direction of travel of air temperature to guide before commencing work at low temperatures of 1 degrees. New guidance has been added to Chapter 6.7 in Clause 3. The purpose of the new guidance here on the performance of testing of window assemblies in accordance with BS EN 1435 is to promote the appropriate specification and performance testing of window assemblies, which will increase confidence in their in-service performance. Okay, just as a reminder, if anyone's got any questions through the throughout this session, please add them into the Q&A tab either at the bottom or the top of your screen, and then the panel will answer them there and then. Okay, so moving on to chapter 7.1. The design approach for free draining balconies has been updated here. A design approach for free draining balconies can be accepted if rainwater will always be routed away from the building to drain via suitably formed soffit drainage trays that direct water to outwards over a continuous formed perimeter edge. But where this drainage design is installed for stacked balconies on multi-storey elevations, the rainwater will tend to cascade down from these edge drainage slots as water runs off each balcony. Under typical wind-driven rainstorm conditions, the water runoff volumes from these balcony catchment surfaces will progressively increase in a downward direction until the full volume of the water reaches ground level. This can adversely affect locations such as main entrances to apartment buildings, as well as any access doorways and private gardens of individual homes situated at ground level. Therefore, in addition to the free draining balcony design, there is a requirement for the design of ground level drainage to effectively prevent ponding or flooding of water. This drainage design is required along all building perimeter locations where thresholds, access locations, and other places of regular use will exist. Another addition to chapter 7.1 relates to clause 7.113 on blue roofs. This now lists key requirements to demonstrate fitness for purpose that should be in the design provisions for any project with a blue roof. So this will include things like certification of waterproofing systems, guidance around the waterproofing layer being suitable for use as part of the blue roof system, flow restrictor outlets, drainage, etc. Now turning our attention to pitch roofs in chapter 7.2. Guidance on wall plates has been amended to include proprietary straps, as well as 30mm by 5mm straps to support any wall plates. Any proprietary straps being used should meet technical requirement R3 and should be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. Also in chapter 7.2, the guidance has been updated for dormer construction to include proprietary dormers. We have accepted proprietary dormer roofs for many years, and it was noted in a technical extra article titled Construction Glass Fibre Manufacturers Association that GRP products that have third-party assessment or CGMA certification are acceptable to NHBC. Additional guidance was then given in a technical extra article titled Installation of GRP dormer windows to avoid common pitfalls identified with the installation of GRP dormer windows. And we've also had other references made to GRP dormers in Standards Extra 44 and 39. So the inclusion of a new section, which is called Proprietary Dormer Roofs under clause 7.213, is simply bringing the standards up to date to confirm what has been said in the previous technical extra articles. The final point on pitch roofs is to highlight the change of title for clause 7.224 to spandrel panels in cold roofs. The subtle change of name was in recognition of the fact that spandrel panels tend to be used in many applications, including roof cassettes and glazing walling applications, to mention a few. The intention here is to make a distinction between spandrel panels used in cold roofs and other types of spandrel panel. Within internal services, clause 8.13 has been brought in line with BS 8558. This means that the guidance in tables 1 and 2 have been updated to refer to minimum insulation thicknesses to delay freezing on internal domestic pipework. New guidance has also been added to the consistent approach to finishes chapter on dry and shrinkage of concrete floors in garages. This was added as quite often there is shrinkage between the concrete garage floor where a ground bearing floor slab is used around the perimeter junction. This guidance indicates that small gaps may appear as a result of this shrinkage. Our final note on the updates to the standards is in relation to Chapter 10.2, Clause 5, which refers to garden and steps in external areas. The previous version of the standards only identified situations where guarding is required, but for clarity, we have now reinstated the requirements for guarding, such as the height of the guarding and maximum gaps, etc. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some future issues and how we see the direction of the standards changing in the future. So we anticipate that there will be a number of significant changes to NHBC standards over the coming years. So far, initial gap analysis has undertaken to identify potential areas for detailed research. This gap analysis takes into consideration the requirements imposed by the Future Home Standards and the climate change agenda. The gap analysis identifies required resource to deliver meaningful updates to the standards by taking into consideration both internal and external stakeholder involvement. For example, the work of the NHBC Foundation, the British Standards Institute, and the consultations associated with changes to approved documents and other regulations. The United Kingdom has set ambitious target to be net zero by 2050. This is against a backdrop of energy efficiency regulations for new housing, which have not been updated for a number of years. The UK government started a programme of consultation on the Future Home Standard in October 2019, with the first set of new regulations to be introduced in England in June this year, with the devolved administrations following. In England, this is looking to a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions of 30% when compared to previous requirements. The changes are the first step as housing will become more energy efficient through higher levels of insulation. The internal services provided will change and the provision of on-site electricity generation will increase. In addition, building regulations ensuring adequate means of ventilation to be provided have been updated, and regulations introduced to ensure dwellings do not suffer from overheating in summer months. Regulation is also introduced to require new developments to include electrical vehicle charging points. The changes in regulation require a review of NHBC standards to ensure they continue to reflect housing as it adapts to meet the challenge of delivering more energy efficient housing. Expected impacts on building practice are likely to occur in the following areas. So firstly, increase in use of MMC. Standards need to be updated to include the different forms of MMC with consideration to a new chapter covering design and repairability. With insulation levels increasing, the standards need to ensure dwellings are not adversely affected by water penetration, interstitial condensation, and structural issues. Increasing use of roof-mounted renewable technology presents issues around structural and weatherproofing integrity being maintained. And with heat pump installations currently being less than 30,000 a year, developers are already starting to use this technology on sites not connected to the gas grid. But from 2025, most low-rise housing will be connected to a heat pump. We need to work with stakeholders to ensure that NHBC standards reflect the best practice here. Standards updated to include technology systems that are new to housing, such as purred ventilation for overheating, battery storage, or heat networks, etc. Innovation will need to be considered at an earlier stage and the standards developed to ensure that homeowners aren't used to test unproven technology. It is likely that these changes will require considerable industry liaison, and as such, it is anticipated that these changes will be incorporated into future versions of NHBC standards. So to close the presentation today, here is a reminder of some of the key chapters and clauses that have been updated in the latest version of NHBC standards. These changes are applicable to any homes where the foundations were started on or after 1st of January 2022. I would just like to remind you that the standards 2022 are available online. The web-based version of the standards has the benefit of being able to access the supplementary information relevant to each chapter, such as NHBC technical guidance notes and other industry best practice guidance. So that's all we had planned for today's presentation. But if you still have questions, then please feed them through the Q&A facility where Stephen, Alex, John and Daniel will pick them up. And I'd like to thank you all for attending. We hope you found this session useful and informative. Hi all, we're going to be sticking around for around 5 more minutes longer. So if you've still got any questions, then please feed them through the Q&A facility where we'll be happy to answer them. Hi all, I think that's the end of the questions that we've got today then. So we're going to close things off now. I'd just like to thank you again for your attention today, and hopefully see you along soon for another webinar in the future. Take care everyone, bye-bye.